A narcissist doesn't enter your life as a destroyer. They arrive as a soulmate, a mirror who seems to understand you more deeply than anyone ever has, but it's not understanding, it's strategy. They study you, observe you, identify where your vulnerabilities lie, where the cracks in your heart still ache to be healed, and then they turn those very things into tools for control. Not everyone who acts like a narcissist is fully aware they're manipulating, but what they absolutely cannot tolerate is when you stop submitting, stop returning, stop granting them the privilege of defining your worth. In that moment, they're not angry because you've changed. They're panicking because their game is starting to collapse. You don't need to scream, you don't need to expose them, you just need to stop. And that very act of stopping is the most powerful blow you can strike at a mind that survives on control, because when you no longer react, they no longer exist in the way they once did in your life. Emotional manipulators aren't afraid of your hatred. What they fear is your indifference. Because indifference is a declaration, I no longer live inside the story you wrote for me. And for someone who survives by rewriting other people's realities, that isn't just a loss of control, it's a psychological death. Your rise doesn't begin with confrontation, it begins with silence. Not the kind that's forced upon you, but the kind you choose. Steady, conscious, and full of power. When you stop trying to be understood, when you no longer crave an apology, when you're no longer invested in a graceful ending, that's the moment the manipulator begins to panic, because their power never came from how much you loved them, it came from whether or not you still reacted to them. A narcissist doesn't build relationships, they build stages. Every emotion of yours becomes a prop. Every tear, every time you swallow your voice, every fight you didn't want to have, all of it confirms that they still matter in your internal world. But when you step off their stage, no drama, no grand exit, they're lost. Because the game has lost its main character. Their first reaction is rarely remorse, it's usually panic, but they won't show it through vulnerability, they'll show it through strategy. Suddenly they become overly kind, they check in with sweet messages, they mention old memories, they say things like, I've changed. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice, every gesture serves one purpose. To get a reaction out of you. And not reacting doesn't mean you're heartless, it means you've seen this cycle too many times. You know how it starts, with a half apology, you know how it continues with a few weeks of fabricated kindness, and you know how it ends, with you apologizing again, being too sensitive again, shrinking yourself again. They're not escalating because they're powerful. They're escalating because you're pulling away, because you've stopped using your emotional energy to fix someone who never intended to fix themselves. And that threatens them on a level they can't articulate, the level where they no longer have authority over how you feel about yourself. Here's the harsh truth. Emotional manipulators aren't afraid you'll hate them, they're afraid you'll forget them. Hatred is still emotion, reaction is still attachment, but when you begin to withdraw, without needing them to acknowledge it, without asking for closure, without waiting for change, you've removed their greatest weapon, the ability to shape your inner world, so they go back to old tricks. Silence, to make you panic. Nostalgia, to make you question. Tears, to make you soften. Playing the victim to trigger your empathy. They're not doing this out of love. They're doing it because you are their emotional fuel. Without you, they have no mirror. Without you, their mask means nothing. And here's the dangerous part. You might start doubting yourself. When they act kind, remorseful, self-awares, a part of you may whisper, maybe they really changed. But be careful. Real change isn't measured by words, it's measured by consistency. And for the narcissist, regret only lasts long enough to test whether your emotional doors are still open. If you reveal even the slightest crack, they'll slip through it. A warm reply, a soft moment, maybe we should talk, just to get closure, and the cycle begins again. No more love bombing, now it's subtle control. No more screaming, now it's guilt. No more blame, Now it's, I take responsibility, but let me tell you why it's still kind of your fault. But if you remain calm, unshaken, if you don't react the way you once did, they start to unravel. Because now they realize there's no script left to run. You are not too cold. You're protecting your sanity. You're not heartless. You're reclaiming your emotional labor. You're not broken. You're awake. And the most painful thing for a narcissist isn't that you left. It's that you're not taking them with you. Not in your thoughts, not in your emotions, not in your story. They used to be the narrator. Now they're just a forgotten chapter. They used to be the loudest voice in your mind. Now they're a distant echo. And here's the beauty of it. You don't need to slam the door to prove you're gone. Sometimes your quiet exit, no argument, no anger, is what rattles them the most. Because this time, you didn't leave to make a point. You left because you finally understood. You walked through that door of silence without looking back, without needing validation, and without a trace of regret. What you left behind wasn't a battle. It was a stage play that no longer had a role for you. But to a narcissist, the stage was never confined to the four walls of a private relationship. Once they realize they can no longer control your inner world, they turn outward, shifting their performance to a new audience, your friends, your colleagues, even your own family, turning them into the next row of spectators. And that's when the smear campaign begins. Imagine standing in front of a giant mirror. In the reflection, you're still you, with all the effort, qualities, and values you've built over the years. But then, out of nowhere, cracks begin to spread like spider webs. Not because you did something wrong, but because someone behind the mirror is striking it with a hammer of deceit, distortion, and manipulation, breaking your image. Every crack represents a twisted rumor, a distorted story, or a fragmented truth ripped apart to serve one toxic purpose, to smear you. And that's exactly what a smear campaign is, a covert but ruthless weapon a narcissist uses when they can no longer control you from within. Why do they do it? Because when you no longer react, no longer chase, no longer seek validation from them, they lose their most powerful source of control. But instead of accepting that loss, they try to regain power by manipulating how others see you. If they can't control your emotions, they'll attempt to control the social environment around you. They plant seeds of doubt in your friends, co-workers, even your own family. Not to prove you wrong, but to make you feel alone. Because when you're isolated, you become vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, you're easier to sway. When you come back, they regain power. They also craft their version of the story so that they're always the victim and you're the one who caused harm. They don't need to twist the entire truth, just share the parts that benefit them, add some emotion and conveniently omit the uncomfortable details. She yelled at me in a cafe, they say, but they won't mention the months of silent threats, emotional manipulation and subtle insults that pushed you to the edge. Disappeared without explanation, they claim, but they won't mention the years you endured gaslighting and emotional control in silence because you loved them. A half-truth, told at the right moment to the right person, is more dangerous than a full-blown lie, and they know it. Social media becomes the perfect public stage for their drama. They don't have to name you, a cryptic quote, a gloomy story, a suggestive photo. That's all it takes to create an impact. Outsiders will connect the dots themselves, and you, even without appearing, become the main character in the script they've written. And while you try to stay silent out of self-respect and to avoid public mudslinging, the public assumes the one who stays silent must have something to hide. Many people fall right here. They react impulsively, post explanations, share screenshots, reveal receipts. But those get clipped, quoted and used against you, reinforcing the original narrative that you're trying too hard to defend yourself. And just as planned, you're pulled back onto the emotional stage you tried so hard to exit. That is the narcissist's victory. They don't need to be right, they just need you to keep playing. Worse still, when people you trust begin asking, is it true what they said about you? your heart sinks. You begin doubting your own memory. Was I really too harsh that day? Am I really the person they say I am? And suddenly, you find yourself explaining, trying to set the record straight, not realizing you've re-entered the performance you once chose to leave. This self-doubt is the deadliest blow, because if you're uncertain about yourself, you can be manipulated by someone else's emotions. So what should you do? You don't need to strike back louder, you need silence, but silence with strategy. Document everything, emails, messages, journals. Not to expose, but to protect if necessary. Speak privately with a few trusted people, briefly without attacking. Share events, timelines, specific behaviors, not vague emotions. If you must speak out, do it calmly and firmly, not in panic. But most of all, let your life speak for you. Stable work, healthy relationships, peaceful mindset, no involvement in drama. That is the most powerful rebuttal, and it doesn't require a single status update. And if you still feel the sting of losing your reputation, remember, reputation is how others see you. Integrity is how you face yourself every day. A narcissist can attack your reputation, but they can't touch your integrity if you've locked that door from the inside. A smear campaign is like a fire. It needs oxygen, your attention, to survive. When you don't feed it with reactions, it will eventually burn out. Observant people will begin to notice the pattern. They smeared you, then the next person, and the next, and eventually the mask falls, without you having to pull it down. So, should you stay silent or speak up? There's no one-size-fits-all answer. If the smear threatens your career, legal standing, or personal safety, act through official channels. If it's just psychological warfare via social media, sometimes a calm, clear, brief response, followed by silence, is enough. Your composure will dismantle their words all on its own. When you don't react, don't panic, and don't feel the need to explain, you take away the very thing they crave most, control over the narrative. And that's when you truly exit the game, not with an explosion, but with a quiet walk away, never looking back. When the narcissist realizes that even your reputation cannot be shaken, they quickly play their final card, a dramatic transformation into a soul-seeking redemption. They appear with teary eyes, a trembling voice, telling tales of sleepless nights and moments of self-reflection that supposedly led to an awakening. In front of an audience they may cry, grip your hand tightly, and promise to make amends for all the pain they caused. But don't forget, those tears are shed on a new stage, where the lighting is no longer harsh like during their smear campaign, but softer, warmer, deliberately crafted to pierce straight through to your deepest compassion. The more moved the audience is, the more they know their script is working, and you, if you don't understand the mechanism of the fake apology, might mistake that gentle glow for the dawn of a healthy new beginning, when in fact it's nothing more than the final, brilliant sunset before darkness falls again. Because a narcissist rarely regrets in the true sense of the word. What they regret is losing access to their supply. What they crave isn't love, it's access to your inner world. An apology, to them, is a shortcut back to your heart. Faster, cheaper, and far less effort than the old manipulation tactics. They are fluent in the language of healing now in vogue, trauma, inner child, therapy. They'll say they've been seeing a therapist, that they've read a thick self-help book and have gained clarity on everything. They'll show accountability by describing their own pain in great detail, a wounded childhood, a cold family, emotional scars that only you can heal. It sounds like sincerity, but the key point is, the story is still about them. They are the star of their own apology, while you, the one who was harmed, are once again cast as the savior. If you listen with a heart weary from wanting to believe this time is different, you might be convinced. But if you listen with awakened ears, you'll hear the cracks. They apologize for making you sad, but avoid naming specific behaviors. They take responsibility, but blame circumstances, childhood trauma, or mental health. They promise change, but instead of outlining a plan, they demand unconditional trust. And when you ask for time to observe, they act disproportionately disappointed, urgently asking, "You don't believe me?" That's the red flag. A truly remorseful person gives you space. A narcissist sees time as the enemy, because the longer it drags on, the looser their mask becomes. There's a small but critical step to avoid the trap. Switch your evaluation from words to actions. Don't respond with hope, respond with silent observation. They say they'll respect boundaries. See if they stop texting you at midnight. They promise honesty. Watch whether they still delete chats or create fake accounts to monitor you. They claim they're healing. Observe whether they commit to therapy, pay for it themselves, and stick with it for 6 straight months. They say they'll let you set the pace. Let time decide. In that silence, if they truly change, their effort will rise naturally, like a spring welling up, without you needing to prompt them. But if it's a performance, their impatience will quickly show. They'll rush the outcome, call you rigid, and complain, "No one ever forgives me." Don't be afraid of being labeled cold. In this play, surface-level indifference is actually the deepest compassion you can show your own soul, because compassion without boundaries is spiritual suicide. You have every right to request proof of sustained change, just like a business demands an independent audit before investing. If they're genuine, they'll persistently demonstrate their value over time. But if they just want immediate access, they'll retreat, or worse, revert to their old tactics, shifting into the role of the victim, abandoned by your lack of love. Then you'll hear the refrain, "Everyone leaves me, even you." Don't falter, it's just their last attempt to trigger your guilt. Remember, an apology only matters when it comes with accountability. Accountability is not a few "I'm sorry." It's the willingness to bear consequences through consistent behavior, by actively repairing the damage done, by not repeating the same cycle. A rose in the narcissist's hand cannot mask the stench of old mud if they stomp back into your life with the same dirty shoes. So instead of rushing to accept the bouquet, look down at their souls. Same mud? Kindly show them the door. Your strategy is not to scream or condemn. Your strategy is to live your truth with clarity, transparency, and self-respect. When they say, "I've changed," you simply smile. Time will tell. When they weep in public, you place a hand over your heart and remind yourself, compassion doesn't require me to gamble my peace, because your peace isn't a gift for them. It's a legacy you earned through every bruised chapter you survived. There may be moments when you feel cruel, even ashamed for not extending a hand. But saving someone who isn't ready to save themselves only turns you into the lifeline they cling to, pulling you both under. Your mission is not to be the self-sacrificing saint. Your mission is to be living proof that rebirth is real, but only when we dare to sever the rope tying us to old tragedies. Your firmness may be the first mirror that forces them to face themselves. And if they turn away, that's a lesson they'll have to carry alone. And believe this, when you walk past every disguise, when your door is no longer their escape hatch, they will find a new target. That hurts, but it also frees you, because it proves that their toxicity never defined your worth. It only reflected the depth of their emptiness. You were never meant to fill that void. You were meant to live fully, brilliantly, in a way only you can. Let the fake apology fall like the last leaf of autumn, while you blossom into your next season. And if anyone asks why you didn't go back down that road, let your peaceful gaze answer, "I believe in actions, not scripts." You may walk away, you may never look back, but the question still lingers. Why are there people like this? Why do some use love to control, wield apologies as weapons, and cry only to manipulate guilt? Were they born this way, or did something shape them into who they became? This is not an excuse for abuse, but understanding the nature of a narcissist is essential if you want to truly free yourself from them, not just physically, but mentally. And to do that, we must go back to where it all began, the formation of narcissistic personality. No one is born a narcissist. Narcissism is a psychological armor, forged in an unhealed childhood where the true self was buried beneath emotional wounds that were never given space to heal. Contrary to the outward image of confidence, charm, or arrogance, deep inside a narcissist is a child who felt abandoned, judged, or excessively conditioned. The love they received may not have been unconditional, but rather love that came with strings attached. Be good and mummy will love you. Be successful and daddy will be proud. Be perfect and you'll be accepted. When a child grows up in such an environment, they learn, I'm not loved for who I am, but for how well I meet expectations. And so the authentic self is hidden. The child begins to construct an idealized version of themselves. Always right, always excellent, always special. This is the seed of what psychologists call the false self, the fabricated identity of a narcissist. They live behind this persona to survive, because to let it go would mean facing the terrifying emptiness, vulnerability, and unworthiness they deeply fear. Ironically, the false self cannot sustain itself alone. It constantly needs validation from the outside world to survive. They need praise, admiration, submission, like a mirror that constantly needs light to reflect an image. This is the root of what's called narcissistic supply, the fuel that keeps their false identity alive. It's the admiring glances, your compliance, your emotional reactions, arguments, even your suffering, all absorbed and used to feed the illusion. The problem is the false self cannot tolerate any threat. A simple criticism, rejection, or someone who cannot be controlled is experienced as a direct wound to their fragile identity. So they retaliate through explosive anger, cold silence, or emotional manipulation, all to protect the mask from cracking. In psychology, this is called narcissistic injury, a blow to the ego. It's like cutting into the thin skin that covers a wounded, fragile self underneath. There are many contributing factors to the development of narcissistic personality disorder, but most revolve around three major roots: emotional neglect in childhood, children deprived of love, or only loved when they behave, learn to trade authenticity for acceptance. This leads to a constant need to prove their worth and a deep fear of being seen in an imperfect state. Excessive idealization or pressure from family. On the opposite end, some children are placed on a pedestal, praised as gifted, the most special. But this admiration doesn't come with guidance on how to cope with failure, creating an internal obsession. I must never fail. I must always be the center. Thus, narcissism begins as a coping mechanism. Unresolved trauma, a significant emotional shock like parental divorce, abuse, or loss, without a safe environment to heal, causes the child to build a mask to survive. Over time, that mask can become their identity. Most importantly, narcissism is not a conscious choice. They don't choose to hurt others like a villain in a movie. They do it because it's the only way they know to protect a collapsing inner self. They manipulate because they don't believe they could be loved if their true self were exposed. They love you, not with connection, but with fear of losing control. And when you stop reflecting that identity back to them, they spiral into confusion, panic, even deep depression. However, understanding does not mean tolerating. Seeing the origin of their behavior doesn't mean you must endure it. Compassion doesn't mean self-destruction. Empathy only has value when it's paired with firm boundaries. You can feel for a wounded person, but you cannot let them use their wounds as an excuse to cut your heart open again and again. Narcissists often need long-term, intensive therapy, and even then, true change is rare. Not impossible, but only when they themselves acknowledge the problem and genuinely want to change for their own sake, not to win you back or polish their image. And that is the final step in your healing journey, to understand that you are not responsible for the pain that shaped them, nor are you their therapist. Your role is not to save them, it's to save yourself, so you don't repeat the narcissistic cycle in another form. Because when you truly grasp what lies beneath their behavior, you stop being angry for too long. More importantly, you stop softening when they return. You see the mask and you no longer want to play the role written for you in their script. Understanding the mechanisms that create a narcissist allows you to see beyond the mask they wear. It helps you stop blaming yourself for not being able to heal them, but that understanding does not erase the wounds you've carried from being attached to them. And in the end, the most important question isn't, why are they like that? But rather, what do I need to do now to truly heal? Because walking away from a narcissistic relationship isn't the same as walking away from a failed romance. You don't just carry a broken heart. You carry emotional exhaustion, cognitive confusion, and a loss of trust in your own feelings. You leave, but you still have to learn how to come home to yourself. Healing after a relationship with a narcissist doesn't begin with loving someone new. It begins with learning how to love yourself again, not the superficial kind of self-love you often see on social media, but a slow and courageous return to every part of yourself that was left behind during the manipulation. It's a journey through fear, through doubt, through distorted memories, until you finally dare to believe again that you weren't wrong for loving. You just gave your heart to someone who didn't know how to hold it. The first step in healing, strangely enough, isn't forgiveness or letting go. It's acceptance. Accepting that you were manipulated, that you were led by false words of love, that you betrayed your own intuition, tried until you were exhausted, hoped far beyond reason. You don't have to deny the pain. You are allowed to acknowledge that you loved someone who didn't love you back with kindness, and that acknowledgement, though painful, is the beginning of freedom. Next, you need to reconnect with the intuition that was silenced. During your time with the narcissist, you were likely convinced that you were too sensitive, too reactive, too complicated. You began to doubt your feelings, your memories, your truth. Healing is the process of relearning how to trust yourself. The next time a feeling whispers that something's wrong, you won't cover your ears. You'll listen. You'll place a hand over your heart and ask, where is this feeling coming from? Is it real? And you'll no longer need someone else to validate your instincts for you to believe them. Another crucial part of recovery is rebuilding your boundaries, not just with others, but with yourself. Boundaries may have been the first thing you lost in the whirlwind of narcissistic love. You said yes when you meant no. You stayed silent when you wanted to scream. You forgave before you had healed. Healing doesn't require you to become hard or cold. It only asks that you be honest about your needs and fiercely protect them. Boundaries aren't walls to keep people out. They are doors with locks, and you hold the key. In your healing journey, you'll also encounter a lingering emotion, disorientation. You lived in a world where the narcissist defined right and wrong, love and punishment. Stepping out of that world can leave you feeling empty. Don't rush to fill that void with someone new. Let the emptiness become the soil where you plant your own seeds. Do small things. Rewrite your journal. Move your body. Listen to a song you used to love. Care for a plant. These gentle actions are declarations. I'm choosing to live my life, not the one they tried to script for me. One part of healing that deserves special attention is forgiving yourself. Many people, after leaving a narcissistic relationship, turn their anger inward. Why didn't I leave sooner? How could I be so foolish? Why did I let them hurt me this much? But remember, you weren't foolish. You believed what you needed to believe. That someone could change, that love could heal. Your only mistake was loving someone who never learned how to love anyone but themselves. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean forgetting the pain. It means looking at your past and saying, I forgive myself because I loved with my whole heart. And finally, healing is about rebuilding trust. Not trust in others, but first and foremost, trust in yourself. That you can recognize red flags. That you are worthy of love that doesn't cost your dignity. That stillness is not loneliness, but the space where you are reborn. That you don't need anyone to tell you you're enough, because your survival through this pain is the greatest proof of all. Healing has no finish line. It is a journey you walk with yourself every day. Some days you'll feel strong, other days you'll fall apart. Sometimes you'll miss them, sometimes you'll be angry, but breath by breath, choice by choice, you are returning. Not to the person you were before they came, but to someone deeper. The version of you who fell into the abyss and climbed back up with your own bare hands. So how do you know that you're truly healing? It's not marked by affirmations from others, nor by a clear milestone or a specific piece of evidence. Healing often arrives quietly, like the first light of dawn, not loud but warm enough to feel. You begin to sense yourself coming back little by little. You no longer anxiously check your phone to see if they've messaged. You're no longer vaguely waiting for an apology for a moment of their awakening. You stop needing their validation. Their recognition is no longer the spinning wheel you keep chasing. You begin to feel a sense of peace in knowing that, whether they acknowledge you or not, you still exist. You are still worthy, and you still have value that's not attached to anyone's gaze or words. That is healing. The memories that once startled you awake at night now begin to fade like old movie scenes. You still remember them, of course, but the pain no longer takes your breath away. You can tell the story without your voice trembling. You can revisit familiar places without having to turn away. Those memories are now part of your journey, not chains that hold you down. You begin choosing peace over drama. You once lived in a constant state of emotional whiplash, up then down, love then rage. You once mistook that chaos for love, but healing teaches you that real love doesn't exhaust you endlessly. True love doesn't demand that you prove your worth every minute, and when you begin to love the stillness, a morning without anxiety, an afternoon without waiting, that's when you know you're stepping out of the toxic cycle you once mistook for home. You also begin to say no, clearly, firmly, and without guilt. You were once conditioned to always be reasonable, always kind, always putting others first. But now you understand that saying no doesn't make you a bad person. It's how you protect yourself. You no longer feel obligated to over-explain, no longer feel the need to justify every refusal. You know where your boundaries lie, and you're no longer afraid to hold them. That is freedom. One day, you find yourself smiling when you hear a song that used to make you cry. You instinctively open that old book again, pick up the dusty camera, put on the shoes you once used for peaceful walks, but left forgotten in the closet. These are the moments when you reconnect with yourself. Not the version they tried to mold, but the real you. The one who once had hobbies, dreams, and the ability to love yourself before you were pulled into the spiral of manipulation. When you start returning to what makes you happy, not to please anyone else, but simply because it brings you joy, that's a sign you are healing. And then you realize their presence or absence no longer holds such power over you, whether they try to create a new story, attempt to provoke your attention, or put on a mask of remorse. You no longer feel the urge to verify. You no longer need more explanations. You don't want to give them one last chance. Because you now know if something once shattered you, there is no reason to place it back in your hands. You've learned to trust your own instincts, the very thing they once manipulate. You no longer need others to validate your pain for you to know it was real. You only need you. Healing doesn't harden you to the point that you stop loving. It makes you love more deeply, but with awareness. You still have compassion, still possess softness, but now it's paired with wisdom. You know how to set boundaries before you open your heart. You're no longer afraid of being alone because you've learned how to befriend yourself. And when you do choose to be with someone again, you come from a place of wholeness, no longer seeking someone to fill the void. You no longer need anyone to rescue you. You've already rescued yourself. If you're reading these words and see even a little of yourself in them, then you are on the right path. No one heals overnight. But with every breath you reclaim, every decision you make for yourself, every time you choose not to step back into the old cycle, all of it is a victory. A quiet yet profound victory, because you're not just escaping someone else. You're finally coming home to you.